The first thing I noticed wasn't the sign. It was the silence. My orchard, Eleanor's orchard, had a sound, a gentle hum of bees in the spring, the rustle of leaves in the summer, the soft thud of a falling apple in the autumn. But as I pulled my truck into the driveway after 3 weeks away visiting my daughter, the silence was sterile, dead. It was the sound of a vacuum. Then I saw it. A professionally printed sign, 4 feet by 4 feet, hammered into the earth right at the edge of my property line. The colors were an offensive shade of beige and forest green, the chosen palette of petty tyrants everywhere. It read, "Future site of the Oakwood Preserve Community Wellness Pavilion, by order of the Board of Directors." Underneath, in smaller letters, was the real message, the declaration of war. Property legally reappropriated under HOA Covenant 17, Section B, for community improvement. My property, my orchard. My hands went numb on the steering wheel. For a moment, the world swam in a haze of red. It wasn't just land. It wasn't just trees. It was the last living thing Eleanor and I had built together. We'd planted the first sapling, a fragile Gravenstein, the day we moved into this house 40 years ago. Each tree marked a milestone. The Fuji for our 10th anniversary. The Honeycrisp for the year our Sarah was born. The stubborn little crabapple a joke between us, for the year I finally made partner at the firm. It was a living history of our marriage, a sanctuary I had tended with religious devotion since she passed. And Brenda Van Houten had put a sign on it. I got out of the truck, my knees weak. The air smelled wrong. It was missing the scent of ripening fruit and damp earth. Instead, I smelled the faint, chemical sweetness of cheap fertilizer, the kind used for manicured, soulless community lawns. They had been on my land. I walked over to the sign. The posts were sunk deep. It was meant to be permanent. I placed my hand on the cold, laminated surface. Reappropriated. A word chosen by lawyers to disguise the simple, brutal act of theft. A car crunched on the gravel of the driveway next door. The electric window of a pristine white Range Rover glided down. Brenda Van Houten leaned her perfectly coiffed, blonde-helmeted head out. Her face was a smooth, Botoxed mask of concern that didn't reach her cold, calculating eyes. "Arthur, darling," she purred, her voice like honey laced with arsenic. "You're back. We were so worried. When you didn't respond to the notices, we had to proceed with the vote." I turned to face her. I said nothing. My mind, the one I had used for 35 years to dismantle corporations and gut arrogant executives in boardrooms, was already working. It was shifting from grief to analysis. The rage was there, but it was being cooled, compressed, and shaped into something useful. A tool. "It's for the good of the community, you understand?" she continued, undeterred by my silence. She gestured vaguely at the orchard. "It's become so, overgrown, an eyesore. This pavilion will have yoga classes, a juice bar. It'll really improve property values." Overgrown. She called Eleanor's legacy overgrown. The trees were perfectly pruned, the ground meticulously kept. She was lying, of course. This wasn't about property values. It was about power. It was about her wanting something and taking it because she believed she could. "You were away, Arthur," she said, her tone shifting to one of mild condescension, the kind you'd use on a forgetful child. "We held 3 emergency meetings. Everything was done by the book. It's a shame you missed them." She gave a little shrug, a theatrical gesture of helplessness. The community has spoken. That was her mistake. Her first critical, fatal mistake. She assumed my silence was weakness. She assumed my grief had made me feeble. She saw an old, retired widower who kept to himself. She didn't see the man who had once orchestrated the hostile takeover of a billion-dollar aerospace firm using nothing but a forgotten clause in a subcontractor's agreement. She had no idea who I was. She was about to find out. I let the silence hang for a few more seconds, letting her get comfortable in her victory. I looked from her smug face to the sign, then back. I gave a slow, deliberate nod. "I see," I said, my voice quiet, level. "By the book." Her smile widened. She thought she'd won. "Exactly. Welcome home, Arthur." The window glided up, sealing her in her climate-controlled bubble of entitlement. The Range Rover backed out and purred down the street. I stood there for a long time, the cold fury building inside me until it was a solid, dense thing in my chest. It wasn't a hot, screaming rage. It was the cold, patient rage of a structural engineer watching a bridge buckle, already calculating the failure points, already designing the demolition. Brenda Van Houten had just declared war. She thought it was a war over a piece of land. She had no idea it was a war she had already lost. She had just signed her own demolition order. And I was going to bring her entire world down, brick by painstaking brick. By the book. Her book. I went inside, leaving the sign standing as a monument to her arrogance. It would be my motivation. I walked straight to my study, the room where I had built my career. The scent of old paper, leather, and black coffee was a comfort. I pulled a fresh legal pad from the drawer and a heavy fountain pen, the one Eleanor had given me when I passed the bar. At the top of the page, I wrote a single heading: Project Demolition. Brenda Van Houten was a classic case study in petty tyranny. She'd been president of the Oakwood Preserve Homeowners Association for 10 years, re-elected each time because no one else wanted the job, and no one dared run against her. Her husband, a man named Robert who looked permanently exhausted, had made a fortune in medical supply distribution. This left Brenda with an abundance of time, money, and a desperate need for relevance. The HOA was her fiefdom. Her reign was one of 1,000 tiny cuts. She measured the height of everyone's grass with a ruler. She dictated the acceptable shades of beige for exterior paint. She fined Mrs. Gable down the street $200 because her garden gnome was, in Brenda's words, aesthetically disruptive. She had the gall to tell my Eleanor, a master gardener, that her rose bushes were non-compliant with the approved floral list. Eleanor had just smiled, a smile that didn't reach her eyes, and told her, "I'll take it under advisement." That was Eleanor's way. Mine was different. Over the years, I'd watched Brenda consolidate power. She surrounded herself with a board of sycophants, people too timid to challenge her or people who benefited from her favor. There was Gary, a retired car salesman who basked in her reflected authority, and Sheila, a woman who seemed to have no opinions of her own that weren't first vetted by Brenda. They were hostages, not colleagues. They rubber-stamped her every whim. The HOA wasn't just a neighborhood association. It was an instrument of her will, managed by a third-party company called Prestige Property Management. They sent the violation notices, collected the dues, and enforced her decrees. They were the faceless bureaucracy that gave her power a veneer of officialdom. I'd never paid them much mind. Another mistake, one I was about to rectify. My investigation began not with anger, but with process. The same process I'd used for decades. Due diligence. I treated Brenda Van Houten and the Oakwood Preserve HOA as a target corporation I was preparing to acquire and liquidate. Phase 1 was information gathering. I spent the first 48 hours doing nothing but reading. I unearthed my original closing documents, the thick stack of paper with the HOA covenants and restrictions I'd barely glanced at 40 years ago. I read every single line, every clause, every subsection, every footnote. I highlighted, I annotated, I cross-referenced. I drank coffee until my hands hummed with caffeine, the legal pad filling with notes. The clause she'd cited, Covenant 17, Section B, was a masterpiece of ambiguous legal language. It allowed the board to reappropriate underutilized or blighted private property for community improvement projects, provided a supermajority of the board approved, and the homeowner was given proper notice. It was a poison pill, a legal landmine left in the documents by the original developers, likely to seize land for future expansion. No one ever thought it would actually be used against a homeowner in good standing. Next, I went digital. I pulled up every public record I could find on the HOA, on Brenda, on her husband, on every member of the board. Property records, tax assessments, business filings, political donations. I built a profile for each of them. Brenda and her husband owned 3 other properties through a shell LLC. Gary, the car salesman, had a suspiciously low property tax assessment on his oversized home addition, an addition Brenda had personally approved. It was a loose thread. I noted it down. Then I turned my attention to Prestige Property Management. Their website was a stock photo nightmare of smiling families and perfectly manicured lawns. Their services were vague: community synergy, asset protection, lifestyle curation. It was corporate nonsense for bullying people about their trash cans. But a corporation is a system, and every system has inputs, outputs, and failure points. I spent a day just watching. I sat in my study, the window giving me a clear view of the street. I noted the comings and goings. I saw the Prestige Property Management truck, a pristine white pickup with the green and beige logo, patrol the neighborhood twice. The driver never got out. He just drove slowly, a predator surveying his territory. I noted the times: 8:17 a.m., 3:42 p.m., predictable. The harassment started on day 3. A certified letter arrived. It was a formal notice of the reappropriation, backdated, citing the dates of the emergency meetings I had missed. It included a bill for $500 for the cost of the sign and a preliminary survey. They were billing me for the theft of my own land. The sheer audacity was breathtaking. It was also sloppy. The postmark on the envelope was 2 days after the date on the letter. A small thing, but in litigation, small things become big things. I scanned the letter, the envelope, everything. I filed it away in a new folder labeled Evidence. That evening, my phone rang. It was David Chen, my neighbor from across the street. David was a retired forensic accountant, a quiet, meticulous man who noticed everything. "Arthur," he said, his voice low, "I saw the sign. I'm so sorry. It's a disgrace." "It is, David, thank you." "Listen," he said, a nervous energy in his voice. "She's out of control, has been for years. I have some things, records. I've been tracking the HOA financials. Something isn't right. The landscaping contract, the new security gates. The numbers are inflated. I think she's getting kickbacks." This was it, the inside source, the disgruntled employee. Every takedown needs one. "David," I said, my voice calm and steady, "would you be willing to meet? I'm putting a case together." There was a pause. I could hear the fear in his silence. Brenda ruled through intimidation. "Yes," he finally said, his voice firming with resolve. "Yes, I would. She can't keep doing this to people." We met the next day at a coffee shop miles from the neighborhood. David was even more meticulous than I'd imagined. He brought a ledger, neatly organized, detailing 5 years of HOA budgets. He pointed out the anomalies. The landscaping contract had been awarded to a company, Verdant Vistas, that was formed just 3 weeks before they got the contract. The address listed for the company was a P.O. box. The cost was 30% higher than the previous contractor. "And look at this," he said, his finger tracing a line item. "Special assessment for fence maintenance, $10,000. The fence was replaced 18 months ago. It's vinyl. It doesn't need maintenance." Kickbacks, embezzlement. This was no longer a civil matter of a property dispute. This was criminal. The scope of project demolition had just expanded significantly. "This is excellent, David," I said, looking at the neat columns of his ledger. "This is the fulcrum." "I was afraid to bring it to anyone," he admitted. "She'd find a way to ruin me." "She won't," I assured him. "Because we're not going to give her the chance. We're not going to attack her head-on. We're going to dismantle the system that gives her power." For the next week, I lived in my office. I cross-referenced David's ledger with the public filings I'd pulled. Verdant Vistas, LLC was registered to a holding company. After 3 hours of digging through Byzantine corporate structures, I found the owner. Robert Van Houten, Brenda's husband. She wasn't just getting a kickback. She was the entire feedback loop. She was approving payments from the HOA to her own company. It was brazen, arrogant fraud. My primary target, however, remained Prestige Property Management. They were the enforcers. They cashed the checks. They sent the intimidating letters. As the contracted agent for the HOA, they had a fiduciary duty. If I could prove they were knowing participants in Brenda's fraud, or even just grossly negligent, I could break the HOA's contract with them, stripping Brenda of her administrative muscle. But I wanted more than that. Breaking the contract was just a skirmish. I wanted total victory. I started digging into Prestige. It was a private company, so its financials weren't public. But there are always trails. I searched for lawsuits, liens, and state business records. I found a few minor complaints, disgruntled homeowners from other communities, all dismissed. Then I found something interesting. A UCC lien filed against Prestige's assets by a regional bank. It was a standard business loan, but the amount was substantial. They were leveraged. They had debt. And debt is a weakness. I decided it was time to move from passive intelligence gathering to active reconnaissance. I looked up the owner of Prestige Property Management, a man named Gerald Finney. A quick search showed he was in his late 60s, had started the company 30 years ago, and had a clean record. He seemed like a standard small-time businessman. But the UCC lien suggested a possible cash flow problem. I needed more information. I needed a look inside. I called my nephew, Mark, a tech wizard who worked in cybersecurity. "Uncle Arthur," he said, his voice bright. "Everything okay?" "I'm fine, Mark. I have a professional question for you. It's purely hypothetical, of course." I laid out a scenario. A small, privately owned company. How would one, hypothetically, get a full picture of its operational and financial health without access to its internal records? Mark was silent for a moment. "Hypothetically," he said slowly, "you'd look for the weak points in their digital infrastructure. Most small companies like that use off-the-shelf management software. They're often poorly configured, rarely updated. You wouldn't be looking to hack them. You'd be looking for public-facing data leaks, invoices uploaded to unsecured cloud servers, client portals with weak authentication. You'd be surprised what people leave lying around on the internet. He gave me a list of search terms and techniques, tools used by security professionals to test for vulnerabilities. It was a masterclass in digital forensics. For the next 2 days, I dove into the digital footprint of Prestige Property Management. And on the second day, I found it. It wasn't a dramatic hack. It was a simple, stupid mistake. A folder on a publicly accessible, misconfigured web server. It was labeled Meeting Minutes Archive. It contained scanned PDFs of internal meeting minutes going back 5 years. It was the kind of boring, administrative data no one would think to protect. And in a file dated 16 months ago, I found the beautiful, exquisite detail I was looking for. It was a single line in the minutes of a quarterly planning meeting. The agenda item was succession planning. The line read, G. Finney expressed renewed interest in exploring a full acquisition offer. Target timeline, 18 to 24 months. Prefers a quiet, private sale to avoid market disruption and employee uncertainty. Gerald Finney wanted out. The UCC lien. The desire for a quiet sale. It all clicked into place. The company was likely barely profitable. The debt was a burden, and Finney was tired. He was looking for an exit strategy, a golden parachute to take him into retirement. He didn't want a messy, public sale that would alert his clients like Brenda Van Houten, that the company was in play. He wanted a clean, simple transaction. My heart was beating with a slow, powerful rhythm. The rage was gone, replaced by the crystalline clarity of a perfect strategy coalescing. I wasn't going to sue Brenda. I wasn't going to break her contract with Prestige. I was going to buy the company that ran her life. I was going to become her boss. The plan unfolded with the precision of a military operation. This was my home turf. Mergers and acquisitions. For 35 years, I had navigated the treacherous waters of corporate takeovers. This was just a smaller boat in a shallower pond. First, I created a new entity, a Delaware corporation for anonymity. I called it Eleanor's Garden Holdings, LLC. It felt right. Her memory would be the vessel for my retribution. I funded it with a significant portion of my retirement savings. It was a risk, but a calculated one. This was no longer about money. It was about justice. Second, I needed a frontman. I couldn't approach Gerald Finney myself. The name Arthur Pendleton would mean nothing to him, but a quick search would link me to the Oakwood Preserve, and the game would be up. I called in a favor from my old law partner, a man named Ben Carter, who specialized in discreet corporate negotiations. He was the best in the business, a shark in a $1,000 suit. I met Ben for lunch. I laid out the entire situation. The orchard, Brenda, the fraud, and the beautiful discovery about Prestige Property Management. Ben listened, a slow grin spreading across his face. Arthur, he said, leaning back in his chair, I always said retirement would bore you. This is the most alive I've seen you in years. A hostile takeover of a suburban HOA management company. It's poetic. It's absurd. I love it. I'm in. Ben's role was simple. Approach Gerald Finney on behalf of an anonymous investor group, Eleanor's Garden Holdings, and make him an offer he couldn't refuse. We knew Finney wanted out, and we knew he was in debt. Ben's strategy was to offer him a price slightly above market value, all cash, with a quick, quiet closing. We would take on the company's debt, freeing him completely. It was the clean exit he craved. While Ben prepared the opening move, I focused on Phase 2. Weaponizing the information David Chen had given me. I hired a private forensic accounting firm, a bulldog of a company I'd used in the past to tear apart fraudulent corporate books. I gave them David's ledger and my own research on verdant vistas. I tasked them with one thing: produce a full, independent, and legally irrefutable audit of the Oakwood Preserve HOA's finances, tracing every dollar of the fraud back to Brenda Van Houten. I also reached out to Maria Sanchez, the young lawyer on the HOA board. I'd seen the way Brenda talked down to her in meetings, the dismissive little pats on the arm. Maria was smart, ambitious, and I suspected deeply resentful of Brenda's bullying. I invited her for coffee far from the neighborhood. She was wary at first. "Mr. Pendleton," she said, "I can't discuss board matters." "Maria, you don't have to," I said, sliding a single piece of paper across the table. It was the corporate filing for Verdant Vistas, showing Robert Van Houten as the sole proprietor. Her eyes widened. She understood the implications immediately. "I knew it," she whispered. "I knew something was wrong." "I'm in the process of rectifying the situation," I told her. "I'm not asking you to violate your duties. I'm asking you to be prepared. When the time comes, the community will need a new board president, someone with integrity." I saw the spark in her eyes. It was a mixture of fear and ambition. I had just offered her the throne. She didn't commit, but I knew she would be an ally when the moment arrived. She would be the voice of legitimacy from within the collapsing regime. The next 2 weeks were a blur of encrypted emails, secure phone calls, and quiet planning. Ben reported that his initial contact with Finney had gone perfectly. Finney was cautious but intrigued. The all-cash offer and the promise of a swift, silent closing were exactly the bait he was hoping for. The negotiation was a delicate dance, but Ben was a master choreographer. Meanwhile, the forensic accountants were a whirlwind of quiet competence. They delivered their report in a thick, spiral-bound volume that felt as heavy as a tombstone. It was a masterpiece of financial devastation. They had not only confirmed everything David and I suspected, but they'd found more. Kickbacks from the paving company that redid the community roads, embezzlement from the reserve fund disguised as administrative fees, a secret credit card, paid for by the HOA, that Brenda used for personal expenses, including spa treatments and designer handbags. In total, they had documented over $400,000 in fraud and embezzlement over a 5-year period. It was methodical, it was blatant, and it was all going to come out. While all this was happening in the background, I played the part of the defeated old man. I let Brenda see me in the yard, looking forlornly at the orchard. I didn't touch the sign. I paid the $500 fine she'd sent me. I wanted her to believe she had won. Overconfidence is the most potent poison. I let her drink deep. Her arrogance swelled to fill the vacuum of my apparent surrender. She started parading contractors around the orchard, pointing and gesturing, discussing plans for her precious wellness pavilion. The sound of their voices, full of false enthusiasm, drifted across the lawn to my study window. Each word was a drop of fuel on the cold fire of my resolve. Finally, the day came. Ben called me. "We're done," he said, a note of triumph in his voice. "He signed the papers an hour ago. Gerald Finney is officially retired. Eleanor's Garden Holdings is the sole owner of Prestige Property Management, effective immediately." I felt a profound, satisfying calm settle over me. I owned the board. I owned the contracts. I owned the very mechanism of Brenda's power. I now had access to every file, every email, every financial record in their system. The keys to the kingdom were mine. The first thing I did as the new owner was send a single email from my personal account to the general manager of Prestige, a man named Henderson, who had been with the company for 20 years. The subject line was Urgent Change of Ownership. The body of the email was simple. It informed him of the acquisition, instructed him to expect a call from me in 1 hour, and ordered him, under penalty of immediate termination, not to communicate with any of his clients, especially the Oakwood Preserve HOA, until he had spoken to me. His call came in exactly 59 minutes. He sounded terrified. I was calm, professional, and direct. I explained that I was the new owner, that a full audit of all client accounts was underway, and that I had discovered severe, potentially criminal, irregularities in the Oakwood Preserve account. I told him his job was safe, provided he followed my instructions to the letter. His first instruction was to use his authority as the property manager to call an immediate, mandatory, all-hands emergency meeting of the Oakwood Preserve homeowners. "What's the reason for the meeting?" he stammered. "The agenda," I said, savoring the words, "will be a special presentation by the management company regarding the future of the community and the final disposition of the Pendleton property." I hung up the phone. It was time to schedule the demolition. The meeting was held in the community clubhouse, a sterile beige room that smelled faintly of disinfectant and stale coffee. It was packed. Henderson's emergency notice, with its ominous and vague wording, had worked perfectly. Fear and curiosity are powerful motivators. I saw the entire neighborhood there, the timid, the browbeaten, the angry, and the complicit. I sat in the back row, a quiet observer. Brenda and her board sat at a long table at the front of the room, looking self-important and annoyed. She clearly thought this meeting was an inconvenience, a procedural hurdle before her bulldozers could get to work. She kept tapping her perfectly manicured, blood-red nails on the table, a sharp, impatient click, click, click that echoed in the tense silence. Henderson, looking pale and nervous, stood at the podium. He cleared his throat. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice. As you know, Prestige Property Management is tasked with overseeing the operations of our community. There has been a recent development. The ownership of Prestige has changed hands, and the new owner is here tonight to address the community directly." A murmur went through the crowd. Brenda's head snapped up, her eyes scanning the room. She looked confused, then angry. This was not on her agenda. Her control was slipping. "Please welcome," Henderson said, his voice trembling slightly, "the new owner of Prestige Property Management, Mr. Arthur Pendleton." I stood up and walked down the central aisle. The silence in the room was absolute. Every head turned. The faces were a mixture of shock, confusion, and for a few, like David Chen, dawning comprehension. I walked past Brenda's table without looking at her. I could feel the heat of her glare on the side of my face. I could smell her perfume, that cloying chemical gardenia scent. It smelled like corruption. I reached the podium and placed a slim laptop on it, connecting it to the projector. On the screen behind me, the logo for Eleanor's Garden Holdings, LLC, appeared. A simple, elegant drawing of a Gravenstein apple tree. "Good evening," I began, my voice calm and measured, amplified slightly by the microphone. "My name is Arthur Pendleton. As of 3 p.m. yesterday afternoon, my family trust became the sole proprietor of Prestige Property Management. This means that, according to the contract signed by your board, I am now the final administrative authority for all operations of the Oakwood Preserve Homeowners Association." I paused to let that sink in. The shock in the room was palpable. Brenda's face had gone from confusion to a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. My first act as the new managing authority, I continued, clicking to the next slide, was to commission a full, independent forensic audit of the HOA's finances. I wanted to understand the health of the community I had just acquired a stake in. What I found was distressing. The next slide was the cover page of the auditor's report. I began to walk them through it, methodically, dispassionately. I spoke like I was presenting a quarterly earnings report, my tone flat and professional. I put up the slide on the Verdant Vistas landscaping contract, showing the inflated invoices next to the corporate filing showing Robert Van Houten as the owner. A collective gasp went through the room. I put up the credit card statements, highlighting the charges for $1,000 handbags, resort stays, and spa treatments. I showed the illegal transfers from the community's reserve fund to a slush fund controlled by Brenda. With each slide, another brick was pulled from the foundation of her power. The crowd began to murmur, the sound growing from a low hum to an angry buzz. Brenda finally found her voice. "This is an outrage!" she shrieked, standing up so fast her chair screeched against the floor. "These are lies. Forged documents. He's a bitter old man who's angry about his precious trees." "Everything you see here," I said, turning to face her for the first time, my voice dropping to a cold, quiet register, "has been certified by the accounting firm and has been turned over to the district attorney's office. A grand jury subpoena for the HOA's full, unredacted records was issued this morning." The color drained from her face. Her mask of rage cracked, revealing the raw panic beneath. "And as for my trees," I said, turning back to the audience, "as for the orchard." Covenant 17, Section B, is indeed a powerful tool. It allows the board, with the guidance of the management company, to seize blighted property for the good of the community. I clicked to the final slide. It was a high-resolution aerial photograph of the neighborhood. My orchard was lush and green. Next to it, one property was highlighted in red. It was Brenda's house. The audit revealed that numerous unauthorized and unpermitted modifications have been made to the Van Houten property, all in violation of state and local building codes. Furthermore, the property is in violation of over a dozen HOA covenants, from unapproved structures to non-compliant landscaping. It is, by the very definition in our bylaws, a blighted property. I looked directly at Brenda. Her entire body was trembling. Therefore, my second official act as the head of Prestige Property Management is to advise the board, the new board, that is, once you and your accomplices have resigned, to invoke Covenant 17, Section B. We will be seizing your property for the good of the community. We're going to tear down that monstrosity of a house and build a park. A real one. For everyone. That's when she shattered. The carefully constructed facade of the powerful HOA president dissolved into a shrieking, panicked mess. "You can't do this!" she screamed, her voice cracking. "I'll sue you. I'll destroy you. Robert, do something." Her husband, who had been sitting silently beside her looking like a ghost, just stared blankly ahead. He had stopped arguing years ago. "It's already done, Brenda," I said quietly. As if on cue, the double doors at the back of the room swung open. 2 uniformed police officers and a man in a suit, a detective, stepped inside. They walked calmly, purposefully, down the aisle toward the front table. The entire room fell silent. The only sound Brenda's ragged, panicked breathing. The detective didn't even look at me. His eyes were locked on Brenda. "Brenda Van Houten," he said, his voice calm but firm. "You're under arrest for embezzlement, wire fraud, and conspiracy." The sound of the handcuffs clicking shut was the most satisfying sound I have ever heard in my life. It was the sound of justice, the sound of a system, a corrupt system, finally failing. The aftermath was swift and total. Brenda's ruin was complete. Faced with the mountain of evidence, she took a plea deal. She was sentenced to 5 years in federal prison for felony fraud. Her husband, implicated in the landscaping scheme, was hit with massive fines and probation. They were forced to sell their house, at a significant loss, to pay the restitution owed to the HOA. The court seized all their other assets. They lost everything. The rest of the board resigned in disgrace. Maria Sanchez, as I had hoped, stepped up and was unanimously elected the new HOA president. With my guidance as the management company, she rewrote the covenants, stripping out the draconian and ambiguous clauses like 17B. The HOA was transformed from a tool of oppression into what it was always meant to be, a simple, functional organization for maintaining the neighborhood. As for prestige property management, I had no interest in being a property manager. I spent 6 months cleaning it up, streamlining its operations, and establishing new ethical protocols. Then I sold it to a larger, reputable firm for a handsome profit. With the money from the sale and the restitution funds recovered from Brenda, we established the Eleanor Pendleton Community Trust. Its first project was to purchase the foreclosed Van Houten property. We demolished the house just as I had promised. In its place, we built a beautiful public park with a playground for children and benches for sitting. And my orchard? It remains untouched. It is now legally protected as part of the community trust. I still tend to it myself, but now I often have company. Neighbors will stop by to chat, to thank me, to ask for gardening advice. David Chen and I have a standing coffee date every Tuesday morning. The silence I first came home to has been replaced by the sounds of a healing community. The laughter of children playing in the new park carries on the breeze. Sometimes, I sit on the bench that overlooks the orchard, the one with the small brass plaque that reads, Eleanor's Garden. I think about how a quiet, methodical rage, properly channeled, can be a powerful force for change. Brenda Van Houten made the mistake of thinking my grief had made me weak. In truth, it had made me focused. She tried to take the last thing my wife and I built together. In the end, she inadvertently funded its permanent protection and gave our community a gift that will last for generations. She wanted a wellness pavilion. She got justice instead. And I got my peace back, in the quiet, rustling leaves of Eleanor's trees. A much better deal, I think.